The music hall was busy that evening. People were greeting each other, tuning instruments, checking the program list, or simply chatting to pass time. It wasn't a huge event, but it was important for the community. Anyone could perform a musical piece: students, adults, hobby players, or people who just wanted to share their talent. Most performers loved the spotlight. They walked around with confidence, laughing loudly, adjusting their clothes, and practicing small parts of their songs in the hallway. But among all the noise and excitement, one person entered quietly. Lena. She walked through the doors softly, almost as if she didn't want anyone to notice her. She held a small bag close to her chest. Her steps were slow, and she kept looking down at the floor instead of the people around her. She didn't look like a performer. She looked more like someone who preferred quiet corners, someone who liked to listen instead of being seen. Lena found an empty seat in the last row and sat down without drawing any attention. She placed her bag on her lap and clasped her hands together. Her fingers were slightly trembling, but she kept them hidden so no one would see. The hall was bright, but she felt like she was sitting in her own little shadow. People around her didn't give her a second glance. Some didn't even realize she had entered. The loud group in the middle row was too busy debating who would impress the audience more. A couple practicing a duet were adjusting their sheet music. A young man with a guitar case walked past her seat without noticing her presence at all. It wasn't the first time this had happened to her. Lena had always been quiet, always the soft voice in a room full of loud ones. People usually assumed silence meant weakness or lack of skill. But the truth was different. She simply didn't like showing off. She preferred to express herself through music, not words. As the event continued, the host walked on stage with a smile. He held a clipboard and began reading the names of the people who had signed up to perform. Almost every name came with applause or cheering from friends and family. Many performers waved proudly or stood up just to show they were there. But when he read one name, his voice slowed down as if he wasn't sure it was correct. Lena? The hall became a little quieter. Some people turned their heads, wondering who it could be. They didn't see anyone stand up. The host scanned the audience with confusion. Then slowly, Lena raised her hand from the back row. The host looked surprised. "Oh, you signed up to play tonight?" She nodded gently. He wasn't rude, just puzzled. Her shy appearance didn't match the confidence usually seen in performers. "All right," he said politely. "You'll be performing later on. Please be ready." A few heads turned toward her. Some people whispered, "I didn't know she plays." A girl murmured, "She looks too nervous to perform," someone else said, not bothering to lower his voice. "She might back out?" Another whispered. Lena heard the comments, but she stayed calm. She was used to being underestimated. She took a quiet breath and looked at the stage while imagining the piano keys under her fingers. That image always grounded her. More performances began, and the hall filled with music. Some pieces were loud and energetic. Others were soft but lacked feeling. A couple of performers forgot parts of their songs. A few were confident but not very skilled. It was a mix of everything. Every performer received some applause, but nothing felt special yet. While everyone enjoyed the event, Lena remained in her seat, listening closely. She noticed the emotions behind the notes, the small mistakes, the moments where players hesitated. She appreciated every effort, even when the audience did and single quotes t. Every now and then, she opened her bag and checked the small cloth she kept inside. It wasn't anything fancy, just a soft piece of fabric she always kept beside her whenever she played. It helped her stay calm. She touched it with her fingertips, then closed the bag again. More people entered the hall as the evening went on. Seats filled up. Parents took videos of their children. Friends waved at performers on stage. The atmosphere felt warm and lively, but for Lena, the world stayed quiet. She stayed in her small bubble, replaying her piece in her head. She could hear every note, every rise and fall. Her heart wasn't nervous, just focused. As the host announced the next break, people stretched, chatted, and walked around. The loud group from the center row moved toward the back. Two of them ended up near Lena, though they didn't recognize her. "Did you see the girl who raised her hand earlier?" One of them asked. Yeah, she looked like she's going to faint. I bet she's a beginner. Probably. She might just know a few simple tunes. They laughed a little. Lena stayed still. She wasn't offended. She understood that they weren't being cruel. They just didn't know her. They judged based on what they saw, not what they hadn't heard yet. The host soon returned to the stage and asked all performers to sit closer to the front. Lena quietly stood up, picked her bag, and moved toward a seat near the middle. She didn't want to stand out, but she couldn't avoid being closer now. The loud group noticed her when she sat down. One of them whispered, "Is that her?" Another nodded. They quickly looked away when she happened to glance their direction. As the performances resumed, Lena felt her breathing become steady. She had been preparing for this moment for months. Not because she wanted applause, but because she wanted to share something meaningful. Playing the piano wasn't just a hobby for her, it was how she expressed everything she couldn't say. Performance after performance passed, and the host kept marking names off the list. Lena's name was getting closer. She could feel the moment approaching like a slow wave. Her heartbeat wasn't fast, surprisingly. She had worried she would feel terrified, but instead she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She had been underestimated so often that this no longer bothered her. She knew her talent. She knew her music. That was enough. Finally, the host looked down at his clipboard and said, "Next we have Lena." A sudden hush spread across the hall. It wasn't a dramatic silence, just curiosity. People wanted to see if the quiet girl from the back could actually play. Lena stood up slowly. She picked up her small bag and walked toward the stage. Her steps were steady, her face calm. She didn't rush. She didn't try to appear confident. She simply walked like someone who belonged there. As she climbed the small set of stairs to the stage, the lights felt brighter than before. The piano sat in the center, waiting. The glossy surface reflected the stage lights. She approached the bench, placed her bag beside her, and sat down. Her back was straight, and her hands rested gently on her lap for a moment. People in the hall leaned forward in their seats. Some crossed their arms. Some raised their eyebrows. Some looked skeptical. The loud group watched with curious smiles. Ready to see what would happen, Lena took one slow breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The hall grew silent, not because they expected greatness, but because they weren't sure what to expect at all. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't scan the hall. Her eyes stayed on the keys. With a steady exhale, she pressed the first note. And in that moment, the shy woman everyone ignored began to reveal the side of herself no one had ever seen. The moment Lena pressed the first note, a hush fell over the audience. It wasn't the dramatic kind of silence you sometimes hear when people are forced to be quiet. It was the kind that comes from genuine curiosity. Everyone wanted to hear more, to see what the quiet woman they had underestimated could do. Some leaned forward, some sat back, unsure if they should expect something ordinary or extraordinary. The first few notes were soft, almost delicate, but there was something about them that immediately caught the attention of the listeners. Her fingers moved with surprising confidence, gliding across the keys with precision that seemed natural, effortless, and almost magical. Each note was clear, clean, and perfectly timed. It was a kind of skill that didn't come from showing off, it came from practice, discipline, and love for the instrument. At first, some in the audience exchanged doubtful glances. "Maybe she's just lucky with those first notes," one whispered. Another shrugged. "It's probably easy, just a simple tune." A few of the louder performers from earlier leaned back in their chairs, smirking, convinced that the shy woman would fumble soon enough. They thought she couldn't possibly be ready to hold the attention of the entire hall, but as the next few bars passed, any doubts began to fade. Lena's playing grew richer, more expressive. She didn't rush. She didn't pause unnecessarily. She let the music breathe, each note carefully measured, each melody flowing naturally into the next. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion. People could feel it without even knowing exactly why. Her music was telling a story that no one in the hall expected to hear. Some parents with young children whispered to each other, "Do you hear that? She's incredible." Teenagers who had been fidgeting and checking their phones stopped mid-scroll. The whispers were quiet, but the reactions were visible. Eyes widened, mouths opened slightly in surprise, and hands slowly lowered from ready-to-clap positions. No one wanted to interrupt the music, even those who had come to see friends perform or simply pass the time, the group of confident performers, who had earlier laughed and assumed Lena was nervous, started to look uneasy. One of them shifted in their seat, as if uncomfortable being so close to someone outperforming them. "She's really good," one muttered quietly. Another bit their lip and didn't respond, suddenly unsure if their earlier judgment had been right. They had assumed that outward confidence equaled skill, but here was Lena, quiet, shy, and underestimated, showing a level of mastery that was impossible to ignore. Even the host, who had welcomed her onto the stage with polite encouragement, found himself smiling with genuine admiration. He had watched performers come and go for years, and he had seen many talented musicians, but there was something different about Lena, the way she controlled the piano. The way she poured herself into each note without theatrics made her stand out immediately. As the piece continued, Lena's music began to tell a story. It was soft and gentle in some parts, almost like a whisper. Then it grew, richer and deeper, with a rhythm that seemed to capture both joy and sorrow at the same time. The hall itself seemed to adjust to her playing. The chatter and movement from the previous moments had completely disappeared. People held their breath without even realizing it, completely absorbed in the sound that came from the small, delicate hands of the shy woman. Lena didn't glance at the audience once. She didn't need to. Her focus was entirely on the piano. Each finger moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of years of practice, patience, and dedication. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing for applause. She was telling her story through music, allowing everyone who listened to feel her emotions and thoughts in a way words could never capture. Few young musicians in the audience watched her in awe. They had been learning piano for years, practicing scales and pieces, and yet they had never seen anyone play with such fluidity, emotion, and control. They exchanged excited whispers, careful not to disturb the performance. How does she do that?" one asked softly. Another shook their heads slowly, amazed. "I've never heard anyone play like this before." The piece began to reach a more challenging section, full of complex chords and fast runs. Most people would have expected a shy, nervous player to falter here. But Lena didn't. Her fingers flew over the keys with precision and grace. Each note landed exactly where it should, and yet each chord carried emotion. It was technical skill paired with artistry, a combination that left the audience speechless. The earlier assumptions that she was timid, inexperienced, or nervous were shattered completely. Even the loud performers who had mocked her earlier couldn't look away. One of them clenched their hands in their lap, whispering, "I can't believe this." Another leaned forward, fascinated, no longer smirking. They had thought confidence and volume meant skill, but Lena's quiet presence was proving them wrong. She was showing them that real talent didn't need to shout. It needed only to exist, and it could captivate everyone naturally. Lena's breathing remained steady, even as the hall's attention focused entirely on her. She didn't rush. She didn't stop. The music flowed like water, rising and falling in waves, carrying the audience along with it. Each note felt carefully chosen, each pause deliberate, each chord filled with subtle emotion. It wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be, but it was powerful. And the more she played, the more the listeners realized how underestimated she had been. Someone in the back whispered, almost to themselves, "I didn't expect this." Another added, "I thought she would be nervous. I was wrong?" The murmurs weren't loud enough to interrupt the performance, but they reflected a growing realization in the room. Lena was far more talented than anyone had guessed. Even the host, standing at the side of the stage, had to take a step back. He had welcomed many performers over the years, and while he had seen skilled musicians before, Lena's playing had a quiet authority, a presence that was hard to define but impossible to ignore. He realized with a small smile that this shy, unassuming woman was about to make a moment that the audience would never forget. As she continued, the music began to draw more emotion from the listeners. People who had come expecting entertainment found themselves feeling something deeper. Memories surfaced, hearts softened, and even the most distracted audience members sat still, absorbed by the story Lena was telling. Her performance wasn't just notes on a piano, it was an experience. It was the kind of moment that made people stop and remember the feeling long after the music ended. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence, never hesitating, never missing a beat. She seemed to anticipate the flow of the music before it even happened. Some notes were soft whispers, others rang with intensity. The contrast made the piece beautiful, layered, and unforgettable. Even those who had doubted her before couldn't deny the truth. They had underestimated a talent that could not be ignored. By the time she reached the middle of her performance, the entire hall had shifted its energy. People leaned forward, held their breath, or closed their eyes just to take in the music fully. The whispers and laughter from earlier were gone, replaced by a reverent silence. Everyone, from the oldest audience member to the youngest student, was captivated. They could feel the care, the emotion, and the thought she put into every single note. It was mesmerizing. The loud performers who had doubted her now sat quietly, their expressions a mix of shock, admiration, and humility. They had expected nervous mistakes, faltering hands, or hesitant notes, but instead they were witnessing mastery. They realized how wrong they had been to judge her by her appearance or quiet demeanor. This was a lesson they would not forget. As the final chords of this section approached, Lena's hands moved faster, more intricate, yet still controlled. The music built subtly, not for show, but because it had to. Every note, every pause, every change in rhythm carried emotion. The hall seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. People were so absorbed that they didn't even notice the faint shuffling of feet or the soft rustle of programs in their hands. The music demanded full attention, and the audience could not look away when she finally paused, even for a brief moment. There was an almost imperceptible intake of breath from the audience. No one applauded yet, not because they weren't impressed, but because they were still processing what they had just heard. The quiet woman who had walked in unnoticed was already rewriting their expectations of talent and performance, and at that moment Lena didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. She only needed to play. She was immersed fully in the music, in the expression of every note, in the story she had chosen to share. The audience was there with her, experiencing something rare and unforgettable. The shy woman, underestimated by almost everyone, had begun to make her mark not with words, not with showmanship, but with music that spoke louder than anything else ever could. The moment Lena's fingers moved across the piano, something in the hall changed. The music no longer felt like just sound, it was a story unfolding in real time. Every listener, whether they had come to see a friend perform or simply to enjoy the evening, was caught in the flow. Her hands moved faster now, but with a purpose. Each note landed exactly where it should, and each pause carried weight. It wasn't just a performance. It was an experience that seemed to touch the heart without even trying. People who had been whispering to each other earlier had stopped entirely. They didn't need to talk, they were listening, feeling, and watching. Even the small children in the audience, who often fidget or get restless, were unusually still. Their eyes were wide, glued to the piano, their little hands folded in their laps. Something about the quiet determination in Lena's playing demanded attention. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was impossible to ignore. Lena herself was fully absorbed. Her face showed concentration, yet it was calm, almost serene. She didn't glance at the audience or react to their expressions. She didn't need to. Every thought, every emotion, every memory she had held inside seemed to pour through her fingers. It was as if she was telling her story without a single word. Each note was carefully chosen, and yet it sounded completely natural. The music flowed, alive and breathing, filling every corner of the hall. The group of performers who had earlier whispered and laughed found themselves leaning forward now. One of them whispered to another, "I didn't think she could play like this." "She's incredible." Another just shook their head, a quiet mix of disbelief and admiration on their face. They had judged her too quickly, thinking quiet meant weakness. But the shy woman on stage was proving them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Her performance was subtle yet powerful, gentle yet commanding. It demanded respect. Audience members started to notice the emotion behind each phrase. The first part of the piece had been soft and tentative, almost like a gentle invitation. But now the melody grew stronger, carrying a sense of hope and longing. It was as if the piano was speaking directly to each person, telling them a story they could relate to without knowing it. Some felt a sense of calm. Others felt a wave of nostalgia, a memory of something they had long forgotten. The music was personal, yet universal. The way Lena's hands moved was mesmerizing. One moment, her fingers danced lightly across the keys, producing delicate, almost whispering sounds. The next moment, she pressed down firmly, letting chords resonate deeply in the hall, vibrating through the air. It wasn't about speed or volume, it was about expression. She controlled every aspect of the sound with precision, yet it never felt mechanical. It felt human, lived, real. People began to realize that Lena's performance was more than just technically good, it was emotionally powerful. They had underestimated her because she had been quiet, because she didn't speak loudly or draw attention to herself. But here she was, commanding the room without a single word, using only her music. It was a reminder that true talent doesn't need to announce itself. True talent speaks for itself, and Lena's playing was saying everything she wanted the audience to know. Few teenagers in the back row were particularly amazed. They had been learning piano for years, practicing scales and songs, yet they had never seen anyone combine skill and emotion in this way. One whispered to another, "How does she make it look so easy?" Another shook their head slowly. "I don't know. It's like the piano is part of her, not just an instrument." They were right. Every movement of her hands seemed connected to her heart, her mind, her soul. It was a performance that transcended simple notes and rhythms. Even the parents in the audience were moved. They had expected a simple recital, perhaps some nice tunes, a polite round of applause. But this was something else entirely. The music was stirring memories, emotions, and feelings they hadn't realized were still inside them. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others sat forward, completely captivated, silently acknowledging the skill and emotion in every note. Lena had become more than a performer, she had become the voice of the music itself. The host, standing to the side of the stage, couldn't help but smile. He had seen many talented musicians over the years, but this performance was different. It wasn't about showmanship or dramatic flair. It was about heart, skill, and authenticity. Lena's quiet demeanor had fooled everyone at first, but now it was clear that she was extraordinary. He felt a sense of pride, knowing that he had welcomed her onto the stage, and that the audience was witnessing something rare and beautiful. As the piece continued, Lena began to explore the middle section of the music. Here, the tempo increased slightly, and the notes became more complex. Many performers might have hesitated at this point, feeling nervous under the pressure of an entire audience. But Lena didn't falter. Her fingers moved with precision and confidence, navigating the challenging passages effortlessly. Each note was clear, each chord perfectly placed, each melody line flowing naturally into the next. It was a seamless blend of technique and artistry. The louder, more confident performers who had doubted her earlier now watched silently. They had expected nervous mistakes or hesitation, but instead they saw mastery. One leaned forward, whispering to another, "I can't believe she's doing this. She's amazing." Another just shook their head, unable to speak. The lesson was clear. Appearances can be deceiving. Quiet, shy, underestimated, none of that mattered. What mattered was talent, dedication, and the courage to express oneself fully. Lena's playing also began to show subtle emotional nuances. Some parts were gentle, almost shy, as if she was sharing a private thought with the audience. Other sections were bold, expressive, and full of strength, as if she was proclaiming her inner feelings to the world. The contrast made the piece dynamic, moving, and unforgettable. Every listener could feel the shifts, even if they didn't know exactly what she intended. Music, after all, speaks to the heart before it reaches the mind. The hall itself seemed to transform under her hands. The soft, warm lighting reflected off the polished piano, highlighting the motion of her fingers. Every sound resonated through the space, making even the back row feel the vibrations. People were no longer merely observing, they were participating emotionally. Some felt tears welling in their eyes. Some felt a sense of joy and hope they hadn't realized they needed. Lena was creating a shared experience, and it was impossible for anyone in the room to remain indifferent. Her focus never wavered. She didn't glance at the audience, even as they leaned forward, silently begging for more. She didn't react to the occasional gasp or murmur of admiration. She was fully in the moment, completely devoted to the music. And that devotion was contagious. Every listener felt drawn into her world, living each note, each pause, each melody as if it were their own. That is the power of true artistry. It doesn't need words to communicate, because it speaks directly to the heart. As the middle section reached its climax, Lena's playing became even more intricate. The tempo quickened slightly, but her hands never faltered. Each chord was perfectly timed, each note perfectly balanced. The audience was completely entranced. They could feel the tension, the emotion, the energy building with every passing second. The music told a story that no one could predict, and yet everyone understood. It was as if she was sharing her soul, one note at a time. Some audience members held their breath as the music surged forward. Even the loud, confident performers from earlier had stopped moving, stopped whispering, and were now watching with admiration. They had assumed that they were more skilled, more prepared, more impressive, but Lena was showing them that true talent is quiet, persistent, and deeply moving. It is not about appearance or show, it is about the ability to communicate, connect, and inspire. And then, just when it seemed the music could grow no more, Lena introduced a gentle, soft passage. It was delicate and tender, almost like a whisper. The sudden shift caught everyone's attention. They leaned in, trying to catch every subtle sound, every tiny nuance. It was a moment of contrast after the intensity of the earlier section, and it made the performance even more powerful. It reminded the audience that music is not just about volume or speed, it is about expression, feeling, and connection. The audience began to realize that Lena was not just performing a piece, she was telling a story. Her music carried themes of hope, struggle, beauty, and strength. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The quiet woman they had underestimated had now captured their full attention. She had transformed from a shy, unnoticed figure into a masterful performer, commanding the room without saying a single word. As the final notes of this section approached, Lena's hands moved gracefully across the keys, gradually slowing the tempo. The sound softened, leaving a gentle, lingering echo that seemed to fill the hall. The audience didn't move. They didn't applaud yet. They were still absorbing, still captivated, still amazed at what they had just experienced. Lena had taken them on a journey, and they were still traveling along it, fully immersed. And through it all, Lena remained focused. She didn't smile, she didn't look up, she didn't seek validation. She played because she loved it. She played because the music needed to be heard. And in doing so, she showed everyone present a simple, powerful. The music hall had completely transformed. The energy was different now, soft, tense, and completely focused. Every ear was tuned to the piano, every eye fixed on Lena. She was no longer just a shy woman who had walked quietly into the room. She had become the center of attention without even trying, commanding the audience not with words or gestures, but with her music. Her hands moved with a rhythm that was both fluid and precise. The earlier sections of the piece had prepared the audience, slowly drawing them into her world. Now, as the music built to its emotional peak, everyone could feel the weight of each note, the depth of every chord. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the spell of her playing. Even those who had doubted her in the beginning could no longer deny her skill. The hall was silent, not just in sound, but in spirit. People weren't shifting in their seats, whispering to neighbors, or checking their phones. They were absorbed, almost mesmerized. Her music was demanding full attention, and everyone was giving it willingly. It was as if the piano itself had become a voice for feelings the audience didn't know they had. And Lena was guiding them through an emotional journey. Her hands glided across the keys with a grace that was mesmerizing. She didn't rush, even when the tempo grew more complex. Each note carried meaning, each pause was deliberate, and each chord seemed to tell a part of a story. There was a quiet power in her performance, a power that didn't need to shout to be felt. The softer moments made people lean in, waiting, while the louder passages made their hearts beat faster. The performers who had laughed at her earlier were sitting rigidly now. Their earlier smirks had disappeared, replaced by awe and disbelief. They had assumed her shyness was weakness. They had assumed quiet meant inexperience. But here she was, demonstrating skill, emotion, and control in a way that made their own performances feel incomplete. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Suddenly aware of how much they had misjudged her, the audience began to notice subtler aspects of her performance. It wasn't just the technical skill or the speed of her hands. It was the emotion, the way she played as if the piano were an extension of herself. Her movements were natural, her expressions soft but intentional. The gentle rise and fall of each phrase spoke to them, even without words. Some closed their eyes to fully absorb the music. Others simply sat, motionless, allowing themselves to be carried along by the sound. Parents in the audience felt a familiar lump in their throats. They had come expecting a normal recital, but this was something else entirely. The music spoke of things they had felt but rarely acknowledged: hope, longing, struggle, and quiet triumph. Some parents exchanged glances, silently marveling at the ability of a shy woman to hold a room so completely. Even the youngest children seemed to understand. Captivated by the energy and emotion that radiated from her playing, the middle section of the piece was particularly striking. Lena had moved from soft, delicate notes to complex, layered chords that demanded technical skill, timing, and focus. Most performers might have hesitated at this point, worried about mistakes or audience expectations. But Lena played without fear, every chord precise, every note clear. Her confidence was quiet but undeniable. The audience could sense it. This wasn't just practice or repetition, it was mastery. Every subtle nuance was noticeable to those listening closely. The gentle accents, the pauses, the way she lifted her fingers just enough to let the sound linger before moving on, all of it contributed to a performance that felt alive. Even seasoned musicians in the audience were leaning forward, impressed by her technique and emotional delivery. They had seen many performances before, but few had left such an impact. Even on the most critical ears, the hall itself seemed to respond to her playing. The polished wood of the piano reflected the stage lights, creating a soft glow around her hands. The sound filled every corner, reaching even the farthest seats without losing its clarity or depth. People could feel the vibration in their chest, the resonance in their hearts. It wasn't just music, they were experiencing an emotion shared collectively, orchestrated entirely by her hands. Lena's expression remained calm, even as the music reached moments of intensity. She didn't smile or glance at the audience, but her focus spoke volumes. Each movement, each note was deliberate and intentional. It was clear she was not performing for applause or attention. She was performing because the music needed to exist, because the story inside her needed to be told. A few members of the audience found tears in their eyes, caught off guard by the power of her playing. Some struggled to hold back emotion, quietly wiping their eyes. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was the profound effect of connecting with something beautiful and authentic. Her music bypassed thought and went straight to the heart. It was impossible not to feel it. The confident performers who had doubted her earlier were visibly shaken. They had underestimated her not because of malice, but because appearances are often misleading. They had assumed loud, bold personalities meant skill. But Lena's performance proved that talent isn't about showmanship, it's about dedication, heart, and the courage to express oneself fully. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly humble in the presence of her quiet mastery. Even the host, standing to the side, could hardly contain his amazement. He had been part of countless music events, and he had seen many talented performers. Yet there was something about Lena's playing that felt different. It wasn't flashy or theatrical, but it was deeply human. It carried authenticity, emotion, and connection. For a few moments, he simply watched, feeling grateful that the audience was witnessing a rare and extraordinary moment. As the piece reached its crescendo, Lena's music grew more complex. Fast sequences of notes ran across the keys, interwoven with deep, resonant chords that filled the room. The tempo increased slightly, but she maintained control. Her fingers moved as if they had a mind of their own, yet every movement was deliberate. The audience felt the tension and release in each phrase, experiencing the story she was telling in a visceral way. Even those who had been skeptical from the start were now leaning forward, unable to tear their eyes away. They were experiencing something they had never expected. A shy, quiet woman who had quietly entered the room was now holding them all captive. The assumptions they had made moments ago seemed almost absurd in comparison to the reality unfolding before them. And then, in the midst of the intensity, Lena introduced a softer, tender section. The contrast was striking. After the powerful crescendo, the gentle notes felt like a sigh of relief, a moment of reflection. People leaned in, listening intently, noticing the subtle shifts in volume and tempo. It was a delicate moment, yet it carried immense emotional weight. Every listener could feel the care and intention behind each note. The hall was completely still. No whispers, no coughs, no rustling of programs. Even the youngest children were absorbed. The audience was united in their attention, collectively holding on to every sound. Lena's music had transformed the room. What had begun as a simple recital was now an immersive, emotional experience that touched everyone present. Her performance was nearing its end, but the intensity had not diminished. She played with a quiet strength, each note carrying meaning, each chord resonating deeply. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of her playing, and every person in the audience was drawn along, feeling every emotion she conveyed. It was clear that this was not just a performance, it was a statement, a declaration of the power of quiet talent and perseverance. By the time the final notes approached, Lena's hands moved gracefully, almost as if reluctant to leave the keys. The music softened, slowing down, allowing the final chords to linger in the air. The audience remained motionless, not yet ready to break the spell. They were still processing, still captivated, still amazed at the woman they had underestimated. The last note resonated, hanging in the air for a moment before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, the hall remained completely still. No one moved, no one spoke, no one breathed audibly. It was a shared pause, a collective recognition of something extraordinary. Lena had taken them on a journey, and they had been completely carried along. Even the confident performers who had doubted her were speechless. They looked at each other, then at her, silently acknowledging that they had been wrong. The shy, quiet woman who had walked in unnoticed had just given a performance that none of them would ever forget. She had proven that talent, dedication, and heart can surpass any expectation, and Lena herself remained calm. She didn't smile or seek validation. She had played because she needed to, because the music was inside her, because she wanted to share a piece of herself. The audience could feel it. That is the magic of true artistry. It doesn't need words, it doesn't need applause. It simply exists, and in doing so, it touches everyone who experiences it. The last note lingered in the air, soft and resonant, before fading into the silence that filled the hall. For a few seconds, there was nothing, no clapping, no whispers, no movement at all. The audience simply sat, frozen, as if they were holding their breath, trying to fully grasp what they had just witnessed. Lena's hands rested gently on the piano keys, and she didn't move, didn't smile, didn't look at the audience. She was calm, almost serene. As if the world outside the music had disappeared entirely, the quiet after her performance was powerful. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a silence filled with awe. People weren't sure if they should clap yet, because they needed a moment to process. They had come expecting an ordinary recital, perhaps a few nice tunes, polite applause, and then the next performer. But what they had just experienced was extraordinary. They had been present for a performance that spoke directly to the heart without a single word. Then, slowly, one hand clapped. A single, soft sound. And then another. The quiet applause began to grow, spreading through the hall like ripples across water. People who had been speechless a moment ago now sat upright, their faces lighting up with admiration. Hands that had been folded in laps or resting on armrests were now joining in the clapping. Tentative at first, and then more enthusiastic, the energy in the room changed. The applause grew louder, more confident, more heartfelt. Some people rose to their feet, unable to contain their excitement. Others shouted words of praise. Beautiful! Amazing! Incredible! The quiet woman they had underestimated had turned the entire audience into her admirers. The music had spoken, and the hearts of everyone in the hall had responded. Even the performers who had laughed or whispered doubts earlier were now clapping, their faces showing a mix of astonishment and humility. They had judged her based on appearances, assuming her shyness meant weakness, assuming quiet meant lack of skill. But Lena's performance had erased every doubt. They couldn't look away, couldn't hide their admiration, and in their applause, they acknowledged the truth. She was extraordinary. People began to approach the stage, some standing in line to compliment her, others simply wanting to see her face, to understand the person behind the music. Their words were simple but heartfelt. That was amazing. I've never heard anything like it. You're incredible. Lena's expression remained soft and humble. She didn't boast or speak loudly. She simply nodded, smiled faintly, and thanked each person quietly. Her humility made the admiration feel even more deserved. The host, standing to the side, felt a mix of pride and amazement. He had invited her onto the stage, not fully knowing what to expect, and now he realized he had witnessed something rare and beautiful. He spoke into the microphone, his voice warm and sincere. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just been blessed with a performance that will stay with us for a long time. Please give Lena another round of applause. The applause grew even louder, echoing off the walls of the hall. Some people were standing, clapping with both hands, cheering, and shouting words of encouragement. Lena's quiet confidence had transformed into something visible, a kind of gentle strength that drew people to her. Her performance wasn't about recognition, yet the audience couldn't help but show it. They had been moved, inspired, and completely captivated. A few audience members wiped away tears, caught off guard by the intensity of their emotions. It wasn't just technical skill they had witnessed. It was the honesty, the heart, and the raw emotion that Lena poured into every note. Her music had reached places words could not. People were smiling, nodding, whispering in awe to their neighbors. They had come expecting a simple recital, but they were leaving with something unforgettable. Even the young children, who had been watching quietly, began to clap with excitement, inspired by the magic of the music they had heard. Some ran to their parents, pointing at Lena, saying how amazing it was. The applause was genuine, full of energy and warmth. Lena had touched everyone, young and old alike. She had shown that quietness is not weakness, that humility can coexist with incredible talent, and that dedication and passion always shine through. The performers who had been confident and bold earlier were now silent in reflection. They had been challenged not just by Lena's skill, but by the power of her quiet presence. She had not shouted or demanded attention. She had simply let the music speak. And the music had spoken louder than anything they could have imagined. Their smirks and whispers from earlier now felt distant, almost embarrassing. They had learned an important lesson: never underestimate someone based on appearances alone. Some audience members approached the piano to take a closer look, their admiration uncontainable. They wanted to see the hands that had created such beauty, to meet the person who had transformed an ordinary evening into something magical. Lena welcomed their attention quietly, nodding, smiling faintly, and speaking softly when thanked. She didn't crave praise, but she appreciated the sincerity behind every word. The hall had become alive in a new way. Conversations started to buzz again, but this time filled with admiration and inspiration rather than casual chatter. People shared what they had felt, described the moments that had moved them, and expressed disbelief at the skill and emotion they had witnessed. Lena had given them more than music. She had given them an experience they would carry with them for a long time, Some older audience members reflected on their own lives, thinking about times they had underestimated others, judged someone too quickly, or overlooked quiet talents. Lena's performance reminded them that brilliance often comes from the most unexpected places, that the loudest, flashiest, or most confident person is not always the most skilled. And sometimes, those who appear quiet or shy hold the most remarkable abilities within them. The applause continued, waves of energy washing over Lena as she remained seated at the piano. She didn't rise immediately, not out of shyness, but because she wanted the music to settle, to let the moment linger a little longer. The audience understood, giving her the space to exist in the impact she had created. It was a moment of connection between performer and listener that went beyond words, beyond judgment, and beyond expectations. When she finally stood, Lena walked toward the edge of the stage with calm grace. People clapped and cheered, some calling out her name. She gave a soft, humble bow, acknowledging their admiration without drawing attention to herself. It was a gesture of quiet gratitude, and the audience responded warmly. Appreciating the authenticity behind her modesty, a few attendees gathered near the stage, wanting to speak with her personally. They asked questions, praised her skill, and expressed how much the performance had meant to them. Lena listened patiently, replying softly and sincerely. She never boasted or exaggerated. Her responses were simple, reflecting the humility that had been evident from the very beginning. The performers who had doubted her earlier stepped forward as well. Their faces showed a mixture of respect, awe, and a hint of embarrassment. They offered congratulations, acknowledging the brilliance they had overlooked before. Lena nodded to them politely, her demeanor calm and gracious. There was no sense of pride or superiority in her interactions, only quiet acknowledgement that she had done her best and shared something meaningful. The event host came forward once again, holding the microphone. "Tonight we have witnessed something truly special," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Lena has reminded us all that talent and dedication often come quietly, without show, without fanfare. She has given us a performance that will be remembered for years to come. Let's give her one more round of applause." The hall erupted in clapping, cheering, and whistles. People rose to their feet, some shouting words of praise. The applause was unanimous, heartfelt, and energetic. Lena stood at the center of it all, still calm, still humble, letting the recognition come without seeking it. The quiet woman who had been underestimated had become the heart of the evening. The performer everyone would remember. Even after the applause began to fade, people lingered. Some approached to speak with her further, others simply sat quietly, reflecting on the performance. They knew they had seen something rare, a combination of skill, heart, and authenticity that could not be taught. Lena had shared her inner world with them, and they had received it fully by the end of the night. Everyone understood the truth. Appearances can be deceiving, quiet people can hold immense strength, and talent paired with dedication and humility can touch hearts in ways no one expects. Lena had shown them that success isn't about loudness or confidence alone, it's about commitment, passion, and the courage to express oneself fully. The hall slowly emptied, but the memory of her performance lingered. People would talk about it for days, weeks, even years. They would remember the shy woman who had walked in quietly, underestimated by many, and left them all in awe. And Lena, walking home that night, felt a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't sought attention or praise, but she had shared her gift. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone that true talent speaks for itself, often in the most unexpected and beautiful ways.